Yo, what's up? Welcome to the Fight Block. My name is Jeremy, here with
Coop.
We're a little bit tardy this week, but, got a UFC on FX coming up. Going to give our predictions for that. We just had UFC on Fuel, some good fights. So we're going to give a quick recap about that, too. Talk a little bit about, Strikeforce, possibly. Daniel Cormier still in limbo, looking for an opponent. And whatever other things come to our minds. So, with that being said, let's get this bad boy started quick and early. So, let's roll right into our UFC on FX predictions. It's Friday night fights. Main event, Antonio Bigfoot Silva takes on Travis Browne. It's a heavyweight matchup. And a fight that was supposed to also be on UFC 151.
It was also supposed to be a different fight, too.
Well, the co-main event. Yeah, the co-main event. Jake Ellenberger against Jay Heron. Jake Ellenberger was supposed to fight originally. It's escaping my mind. Before Jay Heron. I believe Jay Heron was the replacement.
He was supposed to fight, wasn't it Johnny Hendricks?
Yeah, that might have been it. Okay, his opponent escaped, but anyways, Jay Heron was stepped up to take on Jake Ellenberger. That fight was scheduled for 151, I believe. It's one of the canceled fights that got pushed back.
And the main event's also a changed fight too. It's still a great fight. Was still kind of makes a lot of sense, which is always good. You look for that in a replacement, but obviously the first fight was better. It was Travis Browne and Ben Rothwell. I think everybody would want to see that fight a little more, but I don't think that many less people are going to tune in. I think just as many are going to tune in. Ben Rothwell is not like a big draw or anything. That fight just was a little more relevant because Rothwell was coming off a win. But I know I'm going to be tuning in, and once again, UFC is bringing us fights for free, which is great, as long as you're paying your cable bills.
Oh, yeah. And I wonder how, I guess we're probably going to get a Ultimate Fighter episode because they're running the Ultimate Fighter on Friday nights on FX. So I'm guessing we're going to have an Ultimate Fighter episode and UFC on FX this week.
Yeah, this will be first, it looks like, and the UFC Ultimate Fighter will be second.
I think I might touch on just the Ultimate Fighter also later in this episode. Bring it up. I got a few thoughts on my mind. Actually, I think it'll come up in regards to one of our fights here on the card, the John Dodson, who's an Ultimate Fighter winner, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Bringing up Ultimate Fighter and just my thoughts on that right now, the show and everything. But yeah, just to get rolling. First fight on the card, Justin Edwards takes on Josh Neer in a welterweight matchup. We were both kind of talking before we started this episode, but we're both kind of scratching our heads looking at the undercard, kind of thinking, I think there's a few other fights on the undercard that are a little bit more deserving that we feel should be on the FX main card.
Yeah, and it's not like UFC even went with the more exciting fight either, so that's why it's kind of a head-scratcher.
Yeah. I mean, Josh Neer, he always brings it. He's always exciting, one way or another. So I can't complain. It's probably going to be an entertaining fight. And, but yeah, so it's a welterweight matchup. Justin Edwards, he's coming off a loss to John McGuire, who just recently fought on the Fuel card and lost to John Hathaway. Lost a decision in that fight. And Edwards is coming off a decision loss to McGuire. And, Josh Neer, definitely the more accomplished martial arts fighters in terms of experience and opponents and octagon experience. So this is his second run, I believe, in the UFC. He was cut, came back after going on quite a good win streak, and but unfortunately he's coming off a KO loss to Mike Pyle in his last fight.
Brutal KO. It's actually his fourth tour of duty in the UFC.
Fourth?
Jeez, yeah, he had a one and done back at the very first ever Ultimate Fight Night against Drew Fickett. He came back at Ultimate Fight Night 3, stuck around until UFC 62. He re-debuted at Ultimate Fight Night Florian versus Lauzon, stuck around until 104. Did a little Bellator work, bounced around, shark fights and what have you. And he came back for Cruz versus Johnson, and since then he's been stuck fighting on free cards. And this will be his, for MMA math, third UFC on FX appearance in a row, which actually is a statistical record for anybody fighting on this card.
There you have it. But yeah, so he's coming off a knockout loss, as you said, it was brutal. And yeah, I mean, he I'd say Neer is known for taking damage. He does have a previous KO loss, but he's for the most part had a solid chin. Found himself in a lot of brawls, just kind of his style. And
it's not necessarily time to say his chin's gone either. It may just, if you're getting those kind of brawls, you're bound to get knocked out sooner or later.
Yeah. But, I like Neer in this fight. I think he's just got more experience. And, he's solid on his feet. Like I said, he's a brawler. He's game to, stand and trade. But he's also, solid on the ground, too. He's got a pretty dangerous triangle choke. And especially if you're sitting in his guard, he's very active off his back. And all around, he's got a solid mixed martial arts record, 33-11-1. So,
3-to-1 win ratio.
Yeah. So, I'm going to have to go with Neer on this one, and I think he's going to win this. He's going to bounce back from the knockout loss, and I think he's going to finish Edwards. I'm going to say he finishes Edwards by submission. I think the fight eventually ends up on the ground one way or another, whether it be, Neer getting rocked, falling on his back, and finding a way, to submit Edwards from his guard, or could possibly get Edwards back and slap on a choke. But yeah, I'm taking Neer in this fight to win by submission. I'll say in the second round.
I have a gut feeling on this one. For some reason, I think Justin Edwards is going to pull off the upset. I have a feeling that he's going to just, be overlooked by Josh Neer, which, again, I don't ever make predictions just based on heart for the most part. So I am going to have to go with Neer as my official pick. But I just wanted to throw that out there. I think there's a little bit of upset potential here, especially because Josh Neer, one of his traits is inconsistencies. He does lose some fights he should win. So I'm going to go ahead and go with Josh Neer via decision.
Yeah, just looking at Edwards' record here, he's 7-2 in his mixed martial arts career. 4 of those victories are by way of submission, 5 of them are by way of submission, but 4 of those submissions are by guillotine choke. So definitely something to look out for in this fight from Edwards is a guillotine.
Yeah, Cody McKenzie, second coming. Neer has proven he's submittable, too, although he has good jiu-jitsu himself. Again, because he is a brawler, he does put himself in stupid positions. He isn't necessarily one of the top-ranked guys you see getting submitted, like, Dennis Kang, who's like a black belt, and you wonder if he got it at McDonald's because he always does something dumb that gets himself submitted. But, Neer is one of those guys that just kind of finds himself in the wrong place at the wrong time in a lot of fights. But his resiliency, his heart, and his aggression are really what kind of wins it for him. And, he'll be one of those guys who once he ages in terms of fight years, he'll be done almost immediately. Kind of like Junior Dos Santos, actually. Although Junior's fantastic, he does get tagged a lot. So once that guy's chin goes, he'll be pretty much irrelevant. He won't be one of those guys who can really kind of coast on head movement and blocking and, still get by without a chin. But, if Neer's chin has indeed gone and he gets knocked out in this fight, I don't know if I'll ever be able to confidently pick in him again, but I do think I can count on him in this fight to pull out a decision.
Wait, so you're taking Edwards or you're taking Neer?
Taking Neer, although there is upset potential, so don't be surprised.
All right, so you got Josh Neer decision. I'm taking Neer by submission. Moving on to the next fight. It's a flyweight matchup with title implications. Coop, I'll let you introduce this fight.
So this is John Dodson, Ultimate Fighter winner, fighting at a Greg Jackson's camp against the former #1 flyweight in the world, Hussier da Silva, making his UFC debut. Fans don't know who he is now, but they will after this fight. This is going to be a great fight. This is a good matchup. It's hard to tell with these newer weight classes. Every time on paper you see a fight that looks like it should be a mismatch, like me looking at this fight, I'm thinking Hussier should just, whose nickname is Formiga, should just crush John Dodson. But, one thing about these newer weight classes is that you're always seeing some kind of new face at the top of the division, just sort of, as soon as you get used to like a Miguel Torres, there's a Brian Bowles, and as soon as you get used to Bowles, there's a Cruz. So a lot of these kind of newer weight classes, they're really growing, and it shows by how fast their championships and their title contenders change hands. I think, we just saw that with Mark Hominick in the featherweight division. So who knows? It could go either way technically, but Hussier de Silva is no joke. Either way, both these guys are going to be players on some level in this division for a while, I'm predicting. And I'd throw it out there that De Silva's only loss is to top flyweight Ian McCall. So I'm definitely going to go with De Silva in this one. I don't know if he's going to finish it, but I think he can decision John Dodson, who is pretty resilient.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to have to agree with you. I'm going to pick De Silva to win this also. And I'll say he wins by decision. It should be a gritty fight, especially with Dodson coming out of Greg Jackson's camp. They always are game with their game plans and always tough to beat. But so I'm going with De Silva. But I was going to touch on real quick just my quick thoughts on Ultimate Fighter. This is title implications, and really it's been a while since we've had a recent Ultimate Fighter champion work his way up into title contention.
I think the last one was Roy Nelson, who we all will agree was way too overqualified to be on that show anyways.
Yeah. And so my whole idea with the Ultimate Fighter right now is, it's really changed from the early days when the sport was really breaking onto the scene and they were really looking for stars. They weren't really, the company wasn't as stacked as it is now with talent. And so it's really tough to find your Rashad Evans out there, your Diego Sanchez, your Kenny Florians, and all these guys from the original who, started, and it took them many years to grow. But I mean, when they bursted onto the scene early, there wasn't a whole lot of talent. It was easier to find these top guys. Now, I mean, the talent pool is so big. A lot of these guys coming out of the Ultimate Fighter as the champions are, halfway decent mid-card guys that still have a long way to go.
Yeah, they resemble Mac Danzig, the Court McGee's, the
Jonathan Brookins.
They more resemble those guys than guys who are future title contenders. I mean, you have guys like I think Ryan Bader's another example of a somewhat recent one, but even then he was all the way back to Frank Mir and Nogueira, which seems like forever ago now. But I totally agree, and perhaps a future show topic we discuss, was it more of the fact that the sport was growing and that there were these big stars who were undiscovered, or is it more of the fact that, now that the sport has a lot better talent scouts, all these big stars are just plucked off before they even would have a chance to get on the show anyways, for the most part?
Yeah, completely. And, there's a lot of, I know ratings-wise, the show's taken a little bit of a hit. People are saying it's stale. And I think it's just, a lack of, really exciting talent. I mean, I know I'm tuning into, this is my first Ultimate Fighter season I've watched in a while. I've missed the last few. But I'm just tuning in and, no one's really jumping out at me that's got me all that excited. Spoiler alert if you're watching the season at all, but, Shane Carwin's #1 pick went down to a guy that just looked absolutely horrible in his qualifying match. It was an ugly grappling match, and this guy just just destroyed Carwin's #1 pick. And it just kind of, it goes to show, I watch more of the show, and I'm sure, as the show progresses, obviously the person that establishes themselves as finalists obviously have some talent, hopefully, but just in general, it's hard. Like you said, I think the superstars are more, if they're legit, they make a name for themselves outside the promotion. They're signed by the UFC rather than going through this Ultimate Fighter show, and so it kind of just as a viewer, when you got nobodies fighting that, just from the past seasons, and no one really making a name for themselves, it's kind of like, all right, you're just getting all these mid-card guys that are average, that are getting this Ultimate Fighter prestigious title put next to their name, and they just can't live up to, what your Rashad Evanses did. Your, Joe Stevens for a while made a good run. Matt Serra becoming champion after he won the Ultimate Fighter. And Nate Diaz winning. He's now, it's taken Nate a while though. Nate's gone back and forth, but he's back up there. Like I said, I just think the format of the show needs to change or something to where expectations aren't so high for these guys that are coming out.
Or they need to take a couple seasons off, and I'll get into how I think they should do that. Almost like American Idol. It's like the winners kind of got worse and worse in a lot of ways. you got some stars here and there, but it definitely was an overall decline for sure. Just to kind of let the talent rebuild and maybe find some other innovative ways to do it. But I actually think that they should take a few years off from doing it with guys and then do it with women's MMA for a couple of years. And just as many people would tune in if it was Strikeforce. You could still call it the Ultimate Fighter. They would just go to Strikeforce. And because that's actually, you could do for women's MMA what the Ultimate Fighter originally did for men's MMA. You could actually build the future stars because that in and of itself, it's the same sport sort of, but it's a lot more primitive as far as its growth goes. That'll get more people to tune in. You'll get everybody from the casual fans who just want to see cat fights, which again still boosts ratings, so gets more exposure. And then that way you can kind of give the guys circuit a chance to recharge. And then what they should do is the first guys season back needs to be another comeback season. They need to do something to switch it up because, live fights, they tried that, worked for a little bit. But there's really no other way to switch it up other than doing the comeback season. And I know that season kind of was marred a little bit by Travis Lutter missing weight in the end, but he was one of the guys who came closest to beating Anderson Silva. And you also had Matt Serra, who validated the show and I believe became the first champion ever to come off the Ultimate Fighter. But, you could take a guy like, for instance, the main event of this fight, like Antonio Silva or something like that if you're going to do heavyweight. Somebody who just struggled, kind of had some ups and downs, and, promise him a title shot at the end. They say styles make fights, so this is a great way to get somebody like, not that he's in the UFC, but like a Melvin Manhoef, who is, such sort of wrestling deficiencies that he would never make it opponent to get a title shot, but he might make an interesting stylistic fight for the champion. So that's exactly what Matt Serra did. If Matt Serra would have had to work his way through the division, I don't think he ever would have gotten a title shot because there are guys who would have stymied his path. But because of the fact that winning that show earned him a title shot, you just saw perfect stars aligned. Styles make fights. Matt Serra knocks GSP out.
Yeah, and I have a whole other alternative idea, but we'll get back to the predictions. But just to close, I think that just another side note with the Ultimate Fighter is that they need to focus more on the fighters rather than I feel like they're trying to draw more interest by putting on, deciding who the coaches are and building the hype through the coaches and their fights. And in a way, it's good to have, recognizable coaches who are going to eventually fight. It helps promote that fight. But I really think they need to focus more about the fighters, whether it be, change up the style of filming and production and make it just completely a different overhaul to make it interesting and fresh. But, I just feel like emphasis each season's, who's going to be the next coaches, only brings so much. It brings viewers, but it's really not the purpose of the show. The purpose is to find a champion and a legitimate fighter that can eventually, hopefully, contend for a championship in a division.
Or at least be a gatekeeper. Some of the guys aren't even good enough to be, Heath Herring types.
Yeah. So moving along, just to recap that quick fight that we went off on a tangent, I'm taking Hussier de Silva to beat John Dodson by decision. You had Silva also?
I had Silva also. I will say, as far as just because you got me kind of fired up about the Ultimate Fighter, one thing they could do, I'm thinking, is maybe have some sort of to get asses in the seats. Who says the coaches have to fight at the end? They originally on the second season had Matt Hughes and Rich Franklin. Those guys are in different weight classes, and they were friends. They weren't going to fight at the end, but those are big names for MMA, so they drew people to it. Why not have some sort of dream team of coaches with legends? Get Randy Couture, Chuck Liddell, Hoist Gracie, and all these people that fans would tune in to see.
A little bit of wrestling practice from Dan Severn.
Yeah. Why not?
Bring back the ultimate.
Bring Ken Shamrock back.
Exactly.
He's going to fight.
An Ultimate Fighter coach favorite, Ken Shamrock.
Yeah. Dana White inducted him in the Hall of Fame. He actually he likes Ken Shamrock. It'd be a great way to get Ken Shamrock some money, and we wouldn't have to see Ken Shamrock get borderline abused for it. So I would enjoy seeing that. Also, I will be tuning in this season because we got a local favorite on there, Dom Shonuff Waters. I'm a little bit biased, but I will admit there are a couple other guys that impressed me, but he's one of them. Roy Nelson's first pick. If you haven't seen him yet, go on to On Demand and watch the very first fight of the night. An awesome uppercut knockout KO in just about 30 seconds. But yeah, taking Hussier to Silva as well to segue back into the predictions. This one very well could be fight of the night. We're going to give predictions on that later, though.
Flyweight division, man. These guys are fast. And so far, I mean, we've only seen a couple flyweight matchups, but most recently Benavidez, DeMarcus Johnson, good fight. So flyweights definitely bring it. So they can go, all round, all 3 or all 5 rounds, like it's the first.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Moving right along, we got the co-main event, which is actually a rematch, believe it or not. You got Jake Ellenberger, who should be pretty familiar to UFC fans by now. He's been on a tear overall in the welterweight divisions. Only losses are to current interim champion Carlos Condit and to unofficial number 1 contender Martin Kampmann. And he's squaring off with a guy who handed him his first loss, Jay Heron. This is Jay's second tour of duty in the UFC. He's been a longtime respected veteran fighting out of Extreme Couture. Well-rounded skill set. He got bounced out of the UFC in his first tour of duty after getting knocked out by George St. Pierre. He's a legit fighter. Some people view him as a gatekeeper. Some people view him as a guy who could have been one of the top players who's just kind of past his peak. He is a little bit old. But this is an interesting stylistic matchup. I was discussing this earlier. But Jay actually pretty much gave Ben Askren his first MMA loss. Everybody thought so, other than 3 judges. So, unfortunately, he didn't get another opportunity to fight.
Ben Askren, the current Bellator
170-pound
champion, with the was it Olympic caliber wrestler?
Yep.
Yeah.
He's gotten a reputation for being one of the most boring fighters, but he has developed a little bit of a submission game that he's working on. But, he's basically been able to wet blanket everybody and kind of dominate him. But, Jay has shown that he can deal with a wrestler. And, Ellenberger, he kind of might be almost like a better wrestler overall for MMA because he can mix it up. But, Askren's definitely the more smothering, on paper, better wrestler for sure. So, Ellenberger's wrestling may not give Jay Heron problems at all, necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, this should be a solid fight. Heron, I mean, for the most part, my only question with him is, how much of a killer instinct does he have? I mean, a lot of his last fights have gone to the decision to the judges, and I don't know. From the few fights that I've watched him in, it just seems like he's kind of going through the motions, and really I don't know. He's got a weird style to where, he's in a fight and he's, landing his shots, but it doesn't seem like he lands a whole lot of big moments. And that's just as of late. And Jake Ellenberger, he's fought at the top of the division. He is coming off the knockout loss against
Martin
Kampmann, but I do believe, if I remember correctly, he had Kampmann on his heels a little bit in that fight too. I believe he kind of rocked Kampmann, and was then all of a sudden it was one of those moments where fight was going one way, and next thing you know, Kampmann's, if I remember correctly.
Kampmann's a notorious slow starter. He's a guy who'll watch the first pitch go by and not swing at the first pitch. Ellenberger actually coincidentally is a guy who fades the longer the fight goes. Saw that in the Diego Sanchez fight. So it was just one of those moments where Kampmann started to get the better of him, and then instead of just sort of holding his own, he went from holding his own, or almost losing, holding his own, then winning. But a lot of Kampmann's fights go like that. Ellenberger, no joke. Wouldn't be surprised if we see him wearing the strap one day. There's a lot of upset potential in regards to Jay's performances. He just is known for being so calm because he's such a veteran. He kind of makes it look easy, as they say, which kind of it shows why he looks unmotivated. But yeah, it is a legitimate question because he was kind of promised a title shot in Strikeforce, and then he had the rug pulled out from under him by their bookers there. So Jay Heron has a lot to prove. Jake Ellenberger has a lot to prove too. He's lost to the guy once. He wants to remain as close to title contention as possible. It's kind of a must-win fight for both guys. Jay, there is such thing as octagon jitters, so I think he might be able to bounce back from a loss first. But, what a statement he would make by coming in and reintroducing himself to the new wave of fans by taking out one of their perceived top players.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And that original matchup was back in 2006 in the IFL, and Jay won a unanimous decision, but a lot changes in 6 years. So Ellenberger's definitely, I would say, a completely different fighter than what he was 6 years ago. Same can be said for Jay, for the better or for the worst. As of late, like I mentioned, he does look like he lacks some motivation inside the cage, but he does, he is very calm, and he does get the job done. He's a winning fighter, and he is on a roll outside the cage. He did lose, that last split decision loss to Ben Askren, but it was controversial. So
one thing to consider that's interesting is basically I think this comes down to whether you pick Jake Ellenberger or not basically determines how fast you think this fight's going to be over, because Jake's a notorious fader as the fights go further. That's how he lost to Condit. The most, one of the more decisive rounds that won it for Condit was the third round in that fight. So, Jay's one of those guys who has kind of an endless gas tank a lot of the time. So if you basically think Jay's chin's going to hold up for the first round or two, then he has a really good shot to win the fight. I would say it's over 50% if it goes past halfway through the second round, especially in the third round. However, if you think it's going to end any time before then, I would say it's like 70-30 Jake Ellenberger.
Yeah, my pick here, I think Ellenberger's definitely the favorite to win this. There's definitely upset potential, but I'm going with Ellenberger. I think he got caught against Campman. But, first round, from what I remember, looked good against Campman, had Campman backing up, got caught in the second. But other than that, man, Ellenberger, he was on a roll prior to that fight, very close to title contention. And, this is, it's been a while since Herron's been in the octagon. Definitely feel like he might have some octagon jitters, returning some octagon rust. And it is the big stage. And I'm going with Ellenberger for the factor that he's got that killer instinct. He'll look to land the big shots. He's got the wrestling that he can really, mix it up with, keep Herron on his toes. And so I'm taking Ellenberger. I'm going to say he wins a decision. I wouldn't be surprised if he has a few, moments that, whether he rocks Herron, takes him down, that really scores him points. I'm going to take Ellenberger to win the first 2 rounds, but like you mentioned, I think Herron definitely is game to go all 3 and could look good in the third, but I have a feeling that it won't be enough, and I think Ellenberger squeaks out a decision. I'll say 29-28 for Ellenberger.
That's actually a smart pick. I could say that. I think, it depends on Jay Herron's also ability to finish. I forgot to include that. So if it goes into the third round, I think it's almost guaranteed that Herron's going to win the third round if it goes that far. But, Jake Ellenberger very well could win the first 2. In spite of my kind of trying to shed light on Jay Herron, I actually think that Ellenberger is going to come out more motivated than ever. I'm not sold on the fact that he was better than Campman. Campman kind of notoriously does that in fights anyway, as far as being a slow starter. I think Campman is actually, a couple judges' decisions away from the guy who should be in Carlos Condit's shoes right now. I love Condit, and I'm not trying to devalue his, wins situation or anything like that, but I think Campman's in the top 3 in the division as far as capabilities go. I would love to see a rematch against Condit, who, a little history for you. Campman is Condit's only loss in the UFC. But that being said, I actually think Ellenberger is going to blitz Jay Herron. I think he's actually going to knock him out within the first 5 minutes. Herron is resilient. I just think there's octagon jitters are definitely a factor. I know it's hard to predict when they're going to happen and when they're not. Just this past weekend, we had a couple guys make spectacular debuts. But in this case, I'm going to go with the smart money on this one and just, lay it down on Jake Ellenberger, TKO, first round.
Alrighty, so we both got Ellenberger. And moving on to the main event, I think should be fairly exciting because I feel like it's going to be, we'll see a finish here in this fight. It is scheduled for 5 rounds, and not often do we see the heavyweights go all 5. And if we do, it's usually, boring and they gas. So hopefully that doesn't happen. But I see both these guys coming out looking for a finish. Silva, coming off 2 tough losses both losses to top guys in heavyweight division, Daniel Cormier in Strikeforce, and just a recent loss to Cain Velasquez. Both lost both those fights by TKO and knockout. But prior to that, Silva had that really impressive victory against Fedor. Fedor coming off of the Verdum loss, looking to rebound. Or was it no? No, what was that? Which came first, Silva, or where Verdum came first, submitted him, and then Silva followed that up, I believe, with the very impressive ground and pound performance where he just, put Fedor on his back and just beat the crap out of Fedor. So, I mean, Silva, man, opened a lot of eyes with that fight, pressed a lot of people, but the Daniel Cormier, came out equally impressive, if not more, by knocking out Bigfoot in that fight. But yeah, so really, Bigfoot showed that his weakness is his speed. He is a heavyweight, one of the bigger heavyweights, and kind of lacks the striking speed. Good jiu-jitsu on the ground, powerful puncher, but definitely speed is his weakness. Travis Browne, on the other hand, very kind of an agile heavyweight, and I'd say he's definitely got speed in his hands. He's got the power. And I just think this is bad matchup for Bigfoot. Browne could definitely, on the ground, hold his own, and not a bad grappler. And
he's a brown belt, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So he's game on the ground, solid on the feet. He's undefeated in his MMA career. He does have one draw with Czech Congo, but yeah, my pick is going to be Browne in this. I think he catches Bigfoot, sends Bigfoot on the ground, pounces on him, finishes the fight. I'll say in the I'll go first round, catches Bigfoot, and finishes this fight by TKO.
Yeah, I, like you, was very impressed with Bigfoot against Fedor. That really kind of opened eyes because that was a fight where Fedor wasn't caught, but he was actually beat to the punch for 5 rounds. 5 rounds. Beat to the punch for a solid 5 minutes in the second round.
Yeah, I believe it. Did it go to no
TKO between the second and the third?
Because it cut. Yeah.
Yep. First round was pretty even. Most people gave Fedor that round, but the second round's really where Bigfoot opened eyes, and he did hold his own in the first round too, for sure. Some people thought, I think you won that round, but either way, first round was very exciting. Second round was exciting, but definitely a little more one-sided. Bigfoot's one of those guys where he has one clear-cut path to victory, and I don't mean that in the sense of his toolbox. He's got a lot of tools. He can submit you. He can ground and pound you. He technically could knock you out, too. So he's got a good amount of ways to win, but it's really all dependent on the one thing, and that's whether or not he can kind of get you in his clutches and hold you there. Although he's a different style than Brock Lesnar, he's somewhat similar to that. If Brock gets you in his clutches, say goodnight. The fat lady might as well have sung. But, Silva's kind of like that in the sense that if you can, use footwork to avoid him, good takedown defense to get away from his takedowns, and you're a bit faster than him, then, he's going to have some trouble with you. He had a good scrap against Fabricio Verdum, held his own there. Fabricio, another top heavyweight. But one thing that Browne has shown is that he's a very, very explosive athlete. He did gas a bit against Rob Browne, but that was at high altitude. So
that and the Congo fight, I believe, got a little bit slow towards the end there.
Yeah, he wasn't huffing and puffing or anything, but he did slow down. And, drawing against Czech Congo in your UFC debut, excuse me, not UFC debut, that was his second fight, but quite a big leap from James McSweeney to Czech Congo. So, getting a draw against Czech isn't that bad. Czech's a notoriously dirty fighter, too. So coming out of that fight with at least a draw is not the worst thing that could have happened to him. But, Browne, some people are thinking he's overrated. He fought Struve. Struve's kind of improving slowly but surely.
Brutal knockout in that fight.
Yeah, awesome knockout. But Struve's kind of notorious for not letting guys, notorious for not necessarily always fighting to his range. And Browne's like 6'8" anyways, so Struve being 3 inches taller doesn't really necessarily matter. Rob Browne, he wasn't really that impressive because he slowed down. And then Chad Griggs is dropping to 205. So the biggest knock on Browne is that he hasn't really fought anybody. He has looked very impressive, like he's shown a lot of potential. He may, and he's being labeled as a dark horse potential contender in the division. I'm not ready to call him that yet. I think that he could hang his hat on the gatekeeper title right now and the prospect for sure. But we haven't really seen whether he's a future, championship caliber fighter yet. However, this will be a great measuring stick, the best measuring stick we've seen so far as to whether Travis Browne is, serious contender or needs to go back to the drawing board. I'm excited for this fight. If this was against his original opponent, Ben Rothwell, I was actually going to pick Ben Rothwell. Big Ben, finally put it all together and put all his tools together. And he's more tested against top competition. Technically, Bigfoot Silva is more tested against top competition, but, styles make fights, and I see Browne being the more explosive athlete. If this is a 3-round fight, I was going to pick a decision for Browne, but it's 5, and like you said, if they go all 5 rounds, if they can go all 5 rounds, it's going to be heavyweights, like Daniel Cormier and Josh Barnett, who have good gas tanks, and, it's going to be, a competitive fight. I don't think a lot of heavyweights could go all 5 rounds at all. So I think this one you may see kind of an exhaustion TKO almost, or the fight sort of ends with fatigue playing a big factor. So I actually think that Travis Browne's going to come out super explosive, and I think Bigfoot's chin's going to kind of be a little bit more resilient, and I think he's going to last a bit. I think Browne may slow down, but is still going to win the next 2 rounds, and I think that between the 3rd and 4th round, I think this one's actually going to be stopped by cut too. I think that he's going to try to replicate the success Cain Velasquez had, and actually see this one winding up with Bigfoot taking a lot of damage, maybe having swollen eyes or being cut. I just think the doctors are going to stop it. I think Browne's going to fade before he can truly knock him out. But I do think Browne will walk away with the W in the end.
All right, so those are our 4 main card predictions. Like we said when we first started it out, there's some good-looking prelim fights on Fuel, and also Facebook. 2 on Facebook, the rest are on Fuel. But Matt, any of the fights that jump out at you that you want to touch upon real quick?
Yeah, first of all, Jeremy Stephens versus Yves Edwards. This is actually going to be my early pick for knockout of the night. This could be fight of the night too, or it could be knockout of the night in the other direction. I'm going to go Jeremy Stephens, knockout, 2nd round. Yves, is an awesome veteran, always brings it, the grandmaster of thug jitsu as he calls himself. But, I can't get the Sam Stout knockout out of my mind. That was just too brutal of a knockout, and Stephens hits just as hard as Sam Stout in my opinion. So I think we're going to see a repeat of that. Unfortunately for Mr. Edwards, I like Yves. I'd love to see him win this fight actually, but I'm going to go Jeremy Stephens knockout 2nd round. Yeah,
I'll agree with you there. I think Stephens, throws some power in those fists. Same things. Edwards got brutally knocked out by Stout. Is a veteran, could be possibly on his way out of the UFC should he lose. He's been around for a while, so they could throw him another fight. But he is coming off a loss to Tony Ferguson, a UFC champion. But yeah, I'd pick Stephens to win this fight. I don't know if he'd win by knockout, but definitely could see him winning by decision. But yeah, I'd side with you, Stephens.
Okay. The next fight that I think's an interesting matchup. I could see why it wasn't on the main card, but I think it's going to be exciting. It's Thiago Tavares versus Dennis Hallman. Thiago Tavares coming off 2 impressive wins against Spencer Fisher via TKO and Sam Stout. Other than that, he's kind of exchanged wins and losses since he's been in the UFC pretty much. And then you have Dennis Hallman, who's been a little more consistent in the UFC. His only true loss or losses have been to Brian Ebersole and then also John Howard. If you haven't watched that fight, go watch the John Howard fight. Crazy fight. Hallman was dominating the fight up until literally the last 5 seconds of the bout. He gets a freak knockout from a punch in a fight that he was totally dominating. One of the most, picture the sequel to Matt the Terracera fighting Shoney Carter, and there's a spinning back fist knockout in the last 3 seconds. Same crazy kind of thing. Other than that, I mean, Dennis Hallman, he has one of those, Jeff Monson-like records. Ironically, they're friends. They put out a jiu-jitsu book called the Jiu-Jitsu Cookbook, which is a reference to the Anarchy Cookbook, what with Jeff Monson's Anarchy ties. But, 51 wins, 14 losses. He's been around forever. He has more ways to win this fight. Tavares could TKO him. I'm going to go with Hallman via decision on this one.
I think this is an interesting matchup because, Tavares, one of his main questions is his chin. He's always looks good, but he always seems to get caught eventually. But he's on a 2-fight win streak, and, Tavares is, both these guys are solid grapplers, which I think usually when you got two solid grapplers, they kind of cancel and you see them stand and trade. But I definitely see this fight, one way or another, going to the ground. So I think this could make for really an interesting matchup. But I've always been a fan of Tavares. He's always looked good, like I said. It just seems like he gets caught. And he's been in the UFC for a while. I think he, puts things together. I think he pulls off a win against Hallman. I'm going to say he wins this one. I'm going to say by TKO. It's going to be tough to pull off a decision against Hallman. This makes for an interesting matchup, I'd say. But I would take Tavares over Hallman. I'll just say by TKO.
Yeah, this will be one of those fights on the prelims that either no one wants to see after it's over or everyone. It could very well be a boring decision too, but these guys are usually worth watching. I just want to pick Dennis Hallman basically because, he's kind of established himself as a gatekeeper. He usually only loses to guys who are, real title prospects, and other than that, he's real consistent. I'm going to pick Dennis Hallman via decision on this one. Next fight, which this one definitely, no arguments, the more exciting fight and the more relevant fight, and that's Bart Palashevsky taking on Diego Nunes, and that's in the featherweight division. Both guys are always game to bring it, routinely, or turning in performances that are candidates for fight of the night or knockout of the night. I mean, you have Bart coming off a loss to former number 2 ranked featherweight, Hatsu Hioki. And, that was a fight that he walked his way into basically by just absolutely destroying Tyson Griffin with a Chuck Liddell-like flurry, and one knockout of the night there. Palashevsky's biggest hurdle has been consistency. However, he did string together 4 wins, 3 of which were in the WEC, and 1 of which was against Anthony Pettis, which is very impressive. So, again, Palashevsky's one of those guys who loses fights that he, sometimes he should, sometimes he shouldn't, and then he'll beat guys that nobody thinks he can beat, like Pettis. So, always an exciting fighter, nice guy. And then you have Diego Nunes, who's always just as game to bring it. He kind of exchanged wins and losses, only really loses to the highest caliber guys. Last fight he lost to Dennis Seaver via decision. But, this is another potential candidate for knockout of the night or fight of the night. Diego kind of historically is a really strong starter, but kind of fades as the fight goes on. You saw that in the Kenny Florian fight especially. I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think Bart definitely has the finishing power. He likes to come out early and looks for the knockout. We saw that in his recent fight against Tyson Griffin. Knocked Griffin out in the first round. I think that was a surprise to a lot of people too. Griffin, a tough, durable fighter. He had been knocked out previously in his career, but for Bart to come out and knock him out like he did in the first round was quite impressive.
And at a lighter weight, Griffin was a big boy coming down from 155. He was a big 155-pounder, thickly muscled, and coming down to a lighter weight class. And for Bart to blast him like that, that's almost more impressive than Takanori Gomi, who's a huge lightweight, knocking out Tyson Griffin.
Yeah, and I mean, Nunes or Nunez or however you want to pronounce it, Nunes, he's been inside the cage with, the top of the fighters in division. He's been in there with Mike Browne, Kenny Florian, Manny Gambarian, Seaver, legitimate contender. But he's a decision fighter. He does have some submissions to his credit. But, he's just one of those durable guys that'll bring a fight. And that's what I see him doing in this fight. It's going to be a good one, but I think he avoids Bart's knockouts, power, and finds a way to win this fight. I could see him, trying to take Bart to the ground. But I see him landing more shots and avoiding the power and pulling off a decision win. But, I mean, this is, like you said, a really an awesome matchup. And I think out of all the prelims is one that deserves to be on the FX card. But yeah, definitely, I think, is right up there with a fight of the night candidate. And both guys are probably going to bring it. And I'm taking Nunes to pull off a decision.
Oh, I'm a little surprised at that pick, especially because if you look at Nunes' losses, are to fighters who have really competent stand-up, and then also to fighters who are really rangy. You see his wins are against guys, who are not necessarily the tallest. Manny Gamburian, Mike Browne, for instance, Rafael Asuncao. But his losses are to guys like Kenny Florian, LC Davis, guys who kind of have a way of either with closing the distance or who are a little bit more lanky in Florian's case. Seaver's kind of the anomaly there by being a shorter guy. But again, Seaver's excellent at closing the distance, and he finds ways to throw rangy attacks with his kicks. So, you got Bart, who is a few inches taller and has a little bit better reach, and he knows how to use his reach, which is key. You saw how long his arms were outstretched. He was knocking out Griffin. Griffin's short arms couldn't even reach him for a counterpunch. So I really just see Bart, maybe learning a couple things from Hatsu Hiyoki potentially in terms of wanting to grind this fight, and, close the distance, clinch, hold him against the fence, beat him up a little bit, maybe try to score points with takedowns. And then also on the feet, I think he's just going to have the reach. I do think this could be fight of the night easily. It's actually what I'm going to lay my money down on for fight of the night. But I got to pick Bart via decision on this one.
Alrighty. I think, just a quick shout out to Simpson Pierce fight on the Facebook prelim fights. It's a solid matchup. Both guys, got a decent wrestling background and pretty good brawler. I mean, Simpson usually brings a fight. Both guys usually don't finish, so I could see this going to a decision for sure. But we won't give our predictions for that. We'll just move on because we're just about ready to end up the show. I'd like to close on a quick recap of this last week's Fuel 5 was Fuel TV 5. It was Struve against Miocic. And, some solid fights, some surprises. And just going over the card real quick. Just a couple fights to talk about. Surprising win a very big win for Matt Wyman, submitting Paul Sass, who, was known for his submissions. He said he was going to be the first one to submit Wyman, and winning his fights in the UFC left and right by submission. Pretty much just a submission fighter in general for his whole career, and ends up getting submitted by Matt Wyman by armbar in the first round. So that was a surprise and a big win for Matt Wyman, who since coming off the Ultimate Fighter show has really improved his game, and he's, I think, a legitimate guy that deserves a name opponent in the division. I mean, it was an impressive victory. I picked Wyman to win. I didn't think he submits Sass. I thought it would go to the judge's decision, but yeah, big win for Matt Wyman.
Yeah, I think if anybody thought Matt Wyman was going to win, it was going to be via decision, or used his wrestling to avoid the submissions, maybe mixed in a quick takedown and got right back up. But he did, I think that this is the way that people thought he was going to win, the least likely way, other than by the cage collapsing on both guys, and him somehow, or Paul Sass somehow getting randomly DQ'd. So outside of some sort of freak accident like that we've never ever seen before, I think this is the most just normal way that you could end a fight. But nobody was picking Matt Wyman to submit Paul Sass, but it happened, and I think that. Matt Wyman has got something to hang his hat on for this one. Paul Sass, he isn't one of the major players in the division, but he's a bright prospect. And, one of the hardest things to do for veterans sometimes is to look at all these, fights, especially if they've had so many, as being just as important. so often you'll see, a veteran booked against the youngster, and the reason the youngsters tend to get favorable booking, favorable treatment from the odds makers is because to them, when they're fighting a veteran, it's the biggest fight of their life in a lot of cases, or one of them. But to the veteran, it's just another fight. So how do you take it more seriously than you took it when you were fighting, the main eventers? So for a veteran to come out and, basically stomp a new guy is always very impressive.
Oh, definitely. And speaking of veterans, moving on to the next fight, Brad Pickett showing or living up to his nickname, One Punch. Impressive knockout win over Yves Jabon. And, but yeah, impressive win for Pickett. I'm sure that I didn't see the fight myself, but in his, in front of his home crowd, I'm sure they were fired up for him. And big win for Pickett, who, is definitely a game fighter in the division, bantamweight division, and definitely dangerous, and really could give, anyone in the division, I think, a challenge. He's got his knockout power is always, I think a scary fighter to face. So, Brad Pickett showing why he should still be in contention in the division.
Yeah, well, oddly enough, the ironic thing is that Brad Pickett's last knockout came in 2008. Earlier in his career, he was, his striking, he's always had crisp punches and power, but earlier in his career, he was more of a grappler. So the One Punch nickname was it was ironic. It was just given to him because he was, a sharp striker, but it kind of, a lot of opponents would expect him to just brawl with him, and then he would come out and he would just tap him out. So it kind of helped him win a lot of fights earlier in his career. But, he does have sharp hands. In bantamweight, too, you've got sort of like, it's almost paralleling what's going on right now with the economy. You have like the 1%, and then there's, not really much of a middle class. Then you have a lot of lower guys. So these are example of one of the few guys in the kind of the middle class range right here. So Brad Pickett definitely put his name as one to watch with that win right there. I know he's, potentially wanting to name his next opponent, but as far as predicted next fight, I think I'd like to see him against Cub Swanson or the winner of Diego Nunes and Bart Palashevsky. I think that fans win no matter which of those fights is booked. So watch this fight now if you haven't. Exciting fight, great fight.
Moving on to the co-main event, also a good fight. Dan Hardy continues his winning ways inside the octagon. Not a huge fan of Amir's. He's
another Ultimate Fighter winner that hasn't lived up to the hype.
Yeah, so to call this victory over Amir impressive, I don't know if you can really say impressive, but it was a fairly dominating performance. He did lose the first round, I believe. Hardy, it was a close first round, and but Hardy utilizing some wrestling, taking this fight to the ground, and really, mixing things up. And I know post-fight he mentioned, he's here to win now, and, you can see that, where he might throw, technique out the window and just brawl, just with, his instinct. Once he gets in there, he's trying to focus a little bit more and hone in on his technical skills. And, a couple good takedowns, pretty much powered Amir, picked him up, dropped him, and utilized some pretty vicious ground and pound with some brutal elbows, bloodied up Amir in this fight. But yeah, the wrestling wasn't all that impressive takedown-wise. Definitely, if he'd go up against a wrestler, I could still see, Hardy definitely struggling, and he definitely said he's got a lot of room to improve still. But, a win is a win, and, keeps Hardy around longer. I enjoy watching him fight, and we both had the chance of meeting him outside the cage.
Nice guy.
Yeah, and so I'm a fan of Hardy's, and glad he won, and we both picked him to win, and he did so. So big win for Hardy. Looked good, and
yeah,
it's kind of tough. I don't know who you'd really give him next in the division. He's still kind of working his way up, but definitely a good win against Amir.
What about like Brian Ebersol?
Wouldn't mind that fight. That'd be a solid brawl, I'd say.
Yeah, or somebody like maybe Papi Abedi, who, no, Papi Abedi's below him now with losses. Oh, how about somebody like, no, this guy's coming off a loss, but still, I would like to see him against Thiago Alves. Both guys have resilient chins. have struggled a little bit. Used to be, former title contenders. Both of them hit hard. You got Alves, who has a bit better jiu-jitsu himself, and then you got Hardy, who's probably a little bit harder to finish than Alves. I think that's a great fight. Also, I would love to see Hardy against Yoshihiro Akiyama in that division. I think that would be another great fight. Two guys who are known for getting fight of the night, or always turning in performances fans want to see. So I think the smartest fight to make in that case is Bryan Ebersol, but the other two, if you had to do fantasy matchmaker, would be great fights.
You could also go with the winner of the Josh Neer Edwards fight, possibly from the FX card.
Yeah, you could go with that too, for sure. Or, you could actually give, I think, an even smarter fight maybe than Bryan Ebersol, or just as smart, would be Mike Pyle coming off that brutal knockout win. Pyle's a gatekeeper in that division. He's if Hardy can avoid being submitted by him, it shows that, he's still got that great submission defense we saw on display against George St. Pierre, that, although he did get submitted against Lytle. And, if Pyle can avoid getting knocked out by Hardy, then, it shows that his striking's actually, old dogs can learn new tricks. So I think that's a great fight too. As far as Amir's performance go, it's hard to say if he's going to be able to go back to the drawing board and really improve. He's not as young as he was when he was on The Ultimate Fighter necessarily. He is a very technical striker, but, Dan Hardy ragdolling you, your takedown defense sucks. I'm sorry. Like, Dan Hardy is a better wrestler than you, for sure, that's fine, but the way he kind of picked him up, and just slammed him down pretty effortlessly, it looked like, again, yeah, this, for Hardy, the impressive part of this wasn't the name opponent that he beat. It wasn't some big guy. It was just more of showing his skill set, showing he was smarter too. In the first round, Sadala had a good game plan, and he kind of forced Hardy to just try to counterpunch, and he got out of range on a lot of those and blocked efficiently. Hardy showed that he wasn't just in it to brawl and did what champions do. He adjusted his game plan, realized it wasn't working, and really looked like a totally different fighter, like the announcers were mentioning in the second and third rounds. Mixed everything up nicely. It's nice to see a guy fight smarter and then not fight boring. He's a perfect example of, you can still be exciting when you fight smarter and get a little bit more educated and earn some fight IQ. I think the best way to put this, as far as, Dan Hardy's newfound appreciation for ground and pound as well, is what Rashad Evans said, and that was, in regards to Dan Hardy and, his struggles with takedowns. He said, if you can't beat him, join him.
There you go. And, but yeah, so moving along, we're just about coming to the end. Big win for Stefan Struve in the main event, defeating Stipe Miocic. Miocic definitely up-and-coming talent, and was undefeated in his MMA career prior to this fight. Definitely landed some decent shots on Struve, gave him a fight, but Struve just put things together in the second round, had Miocic rocked on his feet, got him up against the cage, and there was just nowhere for Miocic to go, and eventually the ref stepped in and called the fight definitely a good stoppage, but Struve on a roll, and definitely had his chin tested in this fight, and he prior to the fight was saying, I know for a fact I have a good chin. He got blasted against Browne, so I think really anyone who would have done a flying knee like that with a punch waiting for him on the other end would have, that was just one of those knockout punches no matter who you are. But Struve has been in brawls, so I mean his chin has been tested, and that was one of his big questions. But Struve's looking good, and he's got the jiu-jitsu background. We haven't seen him use it a whole lot, but definitely dangerous on the ground. And I think that's one of his weaknesses is getting the fight to the ground and playing to his strengths. Just being as big as he is and as lengthy of a fighter, he can hold his own against I think anyone in the division. Standing up in terms of if he really utilizes his reach, keeps the distance, he could work his range and really land his shots. And his shots are pretty powerful. He landed some pretty big kicks on Miocic also. But he is young. He's still got a lot of room to grow and improve. But definitely looked good. Big win. And I know after the fight he's already called out Fabricio Verdum. Be a huge step up in competition. And but I think it'd be a great matchup for him. Verdum, not all that dangerous in terms of power on the feet, so it'd be a good matchup. And then I'd love to see both these guys end up on the ground. and see how that fight ends up. You know, I definitely would favor Verdum on the ground over Struve, but hey, we haven't seen Struve utilize his jiu-jitsu all that much, and for the most part, when he ends up on the ground, you know, he appears to be pretty dangerous. So those are my thoughts on the main event. I mean, Struve looking good. He's on a pretty nice win streak and definitely right there waiting for a name opponent.
Yeah, I'd actually like to see the fight against Mark Hunt be rebooked. You know, Struve technically hasn't beaten anyone bigger than Mark Hunt's name necessarily. He has more wins in a row, just by, you know, one now. But that fight to me seems a lot, you know, it seems like a fun fight. Verdum, I think that would be, you know, almost as good of a fight too, in terms of matchmaking. I don't think, you know, I think the fans would win in either case for sure, and it would present some interesting stylistic situations either way. But I know Mark Hunt's going to be coming back from his injury probably by the time Struve would be rested, so I'd actually really like to see that fight get made. Another fight they can make too is Ben Rothwell against Stefan Struve, because, you know, by the time Struve would be ready for another fight, Big Ben probably be coming back from an injury too, and Ben and Mark Hunt always, you know, they already fought, so they can't fight again. So I think you may see Rothwell and Hunt booked against Struve and Verdum, respectively.
Yeah, and just to close out, we're reached the hour, so our closing. We'll talk about Struve right now, and this kind of leads into our final topic, which, you know, we'll only touch upon real quick, just throw some names out. But I know you mentioned before we started the episode also. Just the whole issue with Frank Mir pulling out of the fight with Daniel Cormier. That's scheduled for November 5th, I believe, or early November. And, you know, Cormier definitely is still, you know, they're still looking for a fight for him. There's been some rumors out there as to who is going to fight Cormier. Dana White thought Matt Mitrione was going to step up and fight, but that's fallen through, and Mitrione's not fighting Cormier. Cormier is definitely pushing for getting a UFC heavyweight to come over and fight him. Andrei Arlovsky's fighting outside the promotion. We mentioned that in the last episode, so he's off of the market for, you know, in terms of potential matchups. I know Cormier has also pushed himself, or has pushed for a fight with Pat Barry. You know, that's a horrible matchup for Barry, and I wouldn't be too interested in that fight, but he's pushing for a fight with Barry, but
Barry would like to fight.
But you mentioned, you know, a good matchup you'd like to see is a Cormier Struve fight.
Yeah, I've seen that mentioned before, and I think that's a great fight. You get the shortest heavyweight. Well, actually, Pat Barry and he are pretty short. Maybe that's why he called them out.
Yeah.
But you get one of the shortest heavyweights against one of the tallest heavyweights. You know, I have to imagine he can get Struve on the ground, but then again, you know, Struve's tricky in any position with his length and his, you know, his skill set. So, you know, I don't know if Cormier would be able to reach his head on the feet.
Roy Nelson did. Roy Nelson's a pretty small heavyweight, but that, yeah, I mean, I remember seeing Nelson against Struve when those guys stood toe to toe. I was like, this is a freak show fight, and, you know, Roy Nelson pulled out a crazy knockout. I was pretty surprised, but
knocked him out faster than Dos Santos did.
Yeah. So, you know, I don't know. Maybe Struve's got some weird, I don't know, like, smaller guys give him problems. I don't know. But I don't know how that would make any sense. But, you know.
It can sometimes. If you notice, most of Keith Jardine's losses, for instance, were to small, kind of like, more like fast twitch. If Bigfoot Silva's kind of like a slow twitch muscle fiber kind of guy, you know, guys who are more like, they're a little bit better at submissions or whatnot. Their striking isn't as fluid. The guys with the fast twitch muscle fibers like Vanderlei Silva, the guys who just kind of like, you know, really explosive. You know, it seemed like Jardine had trouble with the shorter, more explosive guys. So there is something to that too. Some guys, it's a lot easier for them to fight somebody whose head's right at their level.
Yeah. But yeah, like you made that expressive comment. It's like, do you think Cormier can actually reach his head? So that would make.
I think so. Roy's arms are a little bit longer, and, you know, Struve almost kind of ducked into that one a little bit and put himself in position for it. I mean, Cormier could just take him down and ground and pound him, though, always. So there was always that option.
Yeah, but you got, I mean, with those long legs, and, you know, you get inside it, Struve's guard. I mean,
you're putting yourself in danger. Yeah, that's why I think it's an interesting fight. I I think you could also send, a little more relevant than Pat Barry, if he's ready in time, and Mark Hunt over there too. Why not? Or Ben Rothwell. I'm not sure the status on their injuries, but those could be good fights too. I think it's a situation where they'll find an opponent. I just hope it won't be one that really nobody cares about in the long run. But yeah, that should be interesting.
And there you have it. I believe this is episode number 6, if I'm doing the math correctly.
I will make one kind of last more funny comment,
Yes.
Just about my thoughts on the weekend show. For those who haven't seen it yet, the most one-sided beatdown that nobody saw is Jimmy Manua, light heavyweight, debuting against Kyle Kingsbury. I've seen some funny remarks about this. People are wondering whether Joe Silva has a crush on Natasha Wicks because her boyfriend, Kyle Kingsbury, is, faced basically two of the meanest sons of bitches to debut in the light heavyweight division in forever. This guy just absolutely handed it to Kingsbury and just crushed him. It at times looked like Anderson Silva and Chris Lieben, only more drawn out because Kingsbury's chin just kind of held up. He did get a couple takedowns, which showed that, there is a blueprint to beating Jimmy Manua, and that's to, bring him down to the ground and hope he doesn't get back up and fist fuck your skull.
And on that note, we will close it out, but we'll be back in a few days. We got UFC 153 right around the corner. I believe that's next weekend. Anderson Silva takes on Stephan Bonner. The card's taking a hit, but some good fights, some good ones to talk about, and some tough matchups. It'll be fun to talk about, and just a little preview. I wouldn't necessarily count Bonner out, and I'm expecting a surprising brawl in that fight. But we'll touch more on that next show. It'll be this Sunday. I'm gonna try and get it out as quick as possible. But yeah, other than that, if you're still listening, thanks, and keep tuning in. We're gonna keep trying to bring you an episode every week. Still working on trying to get this thing in podcast format, but that process is going pretty slow. So for now, it's just going to be a video format on YouTube, which is a strange format. I know people watching YouTube video for the most part have a very small patience level. So if you are still listening, props. But yeah, we're having fun. We're talking fights. If you're a fan, I would think it'd be fun to listen and chime in too. So other than that, any closing thoughts, Matt? You gave your closing remarks on the last fights, and yeah, you got anything else?
Tune in this weekend. Again, can't argue with the price. Free fights. That'll be on Friday. What else are you going to do on Friday night? Stay in, save money, don't go out and get drunk and destroy your liver and
all that good stuff.
Paycheck. Yeah. Just tune into UFC. If you're listening to this, you already like it enough to waste a Friday night on it anyways. So come on. Go for it.
On that note, episode over. Peace.